Today is Friday, March 7th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. The family of a fallen Marine is speaking out after President Trump's speech. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, whatever podcast platform you're listening to, your one of choice. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Leave a rating there as well. You can email us if you'd like to give us a story tip, say hello, or just drop on by. Quick Start Podcast at cbn.org. We're getting through the news of the cray here each and every weekday, bright and early. Joining me today on this Friday edition of the Quick Start Podcast, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Tragon Phillips. As I mentioned there at the top, Billy, on the focus story, it's been quite a difference here for the families of these fallen Marines.
Yeah, we're going to talk about our conversation with Christy Shamblin. Her daughter-in-law was killed in Afghanistan. Lots to unpack there, but yes, a very, very big difference between those two administrations.
All right, looking forward to the details there. And on the main thing, Trey, a Christian university in Indiana has a brand new initiative to help pastors.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the ways technology has obviously changed so much over the years, and so many pastors aren't necessarily equipped for what that may look like in 2025. So interesting conversation we had on that issue.
All right, looking forward to that coming up on The Main Thing. The news in 90 is up next, right after this.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem, and the city is restless. The people of Israel welcome Jesus as king, his followers ready for revolution. But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! How will you escape being condemned to hell?
Experience Holy Week like never before.
What have you done?
Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen, Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right, with that, we're going to head to the news in 90 seconds. And the investigation into the death of a Hollywood legend continues. Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead in their Santa Fe home last week, and it prompted a criminal investigation by New Mexico authorities. Detectives described their deaths as suspicious enough to warrant a full inquiry, though no external trauma was found on either of their bodies. Authorities are working to piece together a timeline, with Hackman's pacemaker recording its last activity on February 17th, 9 days before their bodies were discovered by maintenance workers. The couple tested negative for carbon monoxide, and investigators found no significant gas leaks in the home. A search of the residence revealed prescription medications, an open pill bottle near Arakawa, and personal records. Officials are awaiting autopsy and toxicology reports to determine the exact cause of death. At Purdue University, more than 4,500 students gathered earlier this week to worship, hear the gospel, and experience transformation. A large portion of the audience responded to the altar call, with many taking part in baptisms afterward. Unite Us, led by Tanya Pruitt, has been sweeping across college campuses with worship events. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories at cbnnews.com. So this is encouraging, guys, and this is continued. We've been covering these sorts of events here at CBN News. And again, encouraging at colleges, because say what you want, oh, it's just an organized event, or, whatever criticism you want to levy at it, they're getting a lot of people to show up at these events, right? And like when you picture how popular culture sort of paints college students, they're just out partying, they're doing whatever. It's, to me, remarkable that you're seeing this size of a reaction to any event. And we've seen more than just the planned events. We've seen spontaneous ones like Asbury, Ohio State, through the football players there, leading a lot of people towards, spontaneous worship and responses to the gospel. So it's just really cool to see this many people responding, and it's clear that this message is resonating and something is going on, even if we can't, determine on this side of eternity exactly what it is, but it sure looks like a good thing.
Yeah, I think the fact that we're we're watching all these young people show up, and I'm not so concerned if it's over emotionalism, because that's one of the big critiques of this, right? That it's over emotionalism. Young people are reacting. And it's like, even if that is the case, the hope is that at some point people have this recognition of what they actually were experiencing, that it's so jolting and shocking and life altering that they would come back to it later on and understand it if they don't currently. I'm not even saying that's the case. I just think to dismiss that critique, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I have a close friend who is a worship leader, and that's one of the things he said is like, when people say, well, are you doing this or feeling this just because you're having an emotional reaction? And that's not a good thing. He said that is a good thing, right? God created emotions. Should it stay there? Absolutely not, right? It needs to become something much deeper than that. But does the Lord often use our emotions as a catalyst for positive change? Absolutely, and that is not something that I think we should, be critical of. I think that's a beautiful opportunity then to make a disciplined decision, right? Okay, I've experienced this moment, this inflection point, and now from this, I'm gonna dive into something more substantial.
Yeah, and I think when you say the words emotional reaction, it can have multiple meanings. One can be just an founded emotional reaction, and it's just, oh, this is an exciting event, and its music is great, and I love just that there's so many people around. And those would be kind of superficial emotional reactions. But then there's, if you're hearing the gospel message and the Spirit is convicting you, and you're being convicted of your sin, and you're realizing what Christ has done for you, that also could be an emotional reaction, but that's one founded on the truth of the scripture and is something that's right in line with how we should feel. And so if that's the emotional reaction, then that's absolutely fine, right? But so I think there's some qualifiers there when we talk about emotion and the emotional response. And I don't know if you guys agree with that one, but I mean, that's, it can be a wide range of emotions.
We tend to talk about emotions as though they're always bad. Emotions are not bad. They're a reality of how we're feeling. The problem with emotion is when it drives everything you're doing and thinking and feeling. If your emotion is coming alongside the reality of Christ and the gospel, then that emotion is a good emotion to have, right?
Right.
So not all emotions are bad. And I think we have to be careful as Christians, even with understanding where the emotion fits into it. So I agree with you.
With all the negativity that's going on, it's great to see young people in particular, anybody really, it's always exciting, but seeing the younger generations who are often maligned as being just off the rails, going towards God, that's great to see. All right, we're going to go to the focus story now. And a Gold Star mom is responding after the Trump administration caught an alleged terrorist. So what's the story here?
Yeah, we've had Christy Shamblin on before. Her daughter-in-law, Marine Sergeant Nicole Gee, she was one of the 13 service members who were killed when the ISIS-K terror attack unfolded in August of 2021 in Afghanistan there at Abbey Gate. And she had a very interesting conversation with us about what unfolded, this arrest of this alleged terrorist who was involved in this. And she really said it's a bittersweet moment. She said it was shocking to learn that he had been detained. And obviously we learned this on Tuesday night when President Trump was speaking before a joint Assembly of Congress. She said it was shocking, but she said the words bittersweet are my favorite ones to put to this because it's always hard. She said, here's a man who we watched celebrate Nicole's death and 12 others that died with her, and it's very difficult. And so she proceeded to sort of talk about all of the elements surrounding this, really just how her family was notified about it, how the White House engaged with them, but also about her daughter-in-law, this loss that really has been so profound and difficult for her family as they continue to grieve, also being outspoken and vocal about trying to prevent this sort of thing from ever happening to any other families in this country.
What did she have to say about the difference or differences between the previous administration and this administration?
She has been very vocal about this. We've talked with her about it. She has critically discussed how the Biden administration, in her view, did not ever really reach out to them. In fact, she said both Biden and Harris never communicated with them. Obviously, we know this was a big deal for the Biden administration when this event happened, when these service members were killed. So there was not communication going on with the family, really, not really any. And so she always felt overlooked. She was always speaking out. They were trying to make their voices heard, and the government didn't care. But now she's saying that the Trump administration is in regular contact. She said it's a night and day difference. She said the Biden-Harris administration never reached out to our families ever. Their entire administration was busy covering up the fact that Biden was not competent, and it took all the focus away from everything that needed to be happening to protect Americans and to protect our troops and interests. So she took a very harsh stance on that, but said that, even before Trump made this announcement to the world during his speech, he actually called the family from the Situation Room that afternoon and said, this news is going to come out in a few hours. We want you to know this. He directly spoke to them. He didn't have somebody else do it. He was on the phone calling the family. So that is the night and day difference they're talking about.
And what's her prayer right now for her family?
Look, this is a very difficult situation. It's been a couple of years now, but her son lost his wife. They lost a beloved family member. And she really just said, please pray for peace. She was asking the public, I said, how can people pray for you? She said, pray for peace. She said, you have to create an entire new life that you don't want to create. We were happy with our life before, but we have to create new lives. And it's very hard to do that. So I think the boldness as well to continue speaking out the way that they have. It's not easy to be reminded constantly of the worst moment in your family's history.
Yeah. And, it's what stands out to me as you go through that story, Billy, is the fact that President Trump called personally on this because, you can understand if a president can't personally reach out to every single person on every story, even if it's a big story. The presidents have a lot going on, right? It's a very busy job, and it should be a very busy job. So it stands out to me that he's willing to do that. And honestly, I think, for whatever flaws President Trump or people think President Trump might have, to call him, when you see people call him heartless or whatever, that type of a critique at him, I don't know that you can possibly get there when you look at how much time he spends with just regular Americans that have gone through something like this. I mean, I just saw a video the other day from when he was in North Carolina, and how politicians go in and they'll try to speak to the issue. They had set up a microphone for him and stuff, and he stepped aside and let the people there who had lost their homes and everything, he let them talk to the press, and he stepped aside and did that. So for whatever criticisms they levy at Trump on his tact or whatever, he does seem to have a knack for, and really a genuine concern for Americans.
I just want to throw one thing out there, and then I'll throw it to you, Trey. And Raj and I talked about this on the YouTube channel. People can go and look for that video. When I interviewed Trump in 2014, before he ever ran for president, he was sounding the alarm about Saeed Abedini. We've talked about this, about the American pastor who was detained in Iran. I mean, this has been an ongoing love Trump, hate Trump, no matter what you think about Trump. Dislike Trump, like him, I don't care. This has been a consistent theme for him of people being detained, people struggling, people losing a loved one, and him reaching out to those people and trying to help. And so that is interesting to note.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think when it comes to issues like Abedini, I think it's clear Trump cares about Christian persecution. That's something that is on his mind, and it's something that he wants to take action on. And similarly, when there's been issues of wrongdoing, I think that is something that's at the top of the president's mind. And I think, love Trump, hate Trump, indifferent to Trump, as you were saying, Dan, I think Trump is somebody who likes people. Like, I think that's just obvious. He likes interacting with people and getting to know people and hearing their stories. And I think that maybe more than anything is what endears Trump to so many Americans, right? Is they may not like his policies, they may not like the posts that he throws up on X or wherever, but they do like that they feel like they've got a representation of themselves in the White House. Like, this is a guy who, his life, which is funny, right? Because the vessel of Trump, right, is somebody who's a billionaire, he's been a reality TV star, he's on paper one of the most unrelatable people, or should be one of the most unrelatable people to the everyday man and woman like us. But at the same time, there's hardly a more relatable person. There's hardly a more regular guy who is in pop culture and in politics these days than Donald Trump.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. Dynamic of a personality. But Billy, any final thoughts here?
I think I would just say that we have to be careful how we judge people, right? There's rightful judgment, and I think when it comes to this sort of thing, we got to be open, regardless of what we think about a person's personality, that there may be moments that they're doing something heartfelt. And I think this family, and we've interviewed many others who have felt that is the case, and that's what's happening. So,
all right, well, appreciate you bringing this one to the podcast today. And if you want to see that full interview, we'll put the link here in the description of this podcast episode, the link to that video that's on the CBN News YouTube channel. Make sure you're just subscribed to our CBN News YouTube channel, by the way. A lot of great content coming out there from the entire CBN News team, from Trey, from Billy, from Raj, and then the whole CBN News staff. Great reporting each and every single day. So appreciate that. What is Preach Labs and how is it helping pastors? The story on that is coming up in 30 seconds.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem. Crowds welcome Jesus as king. Rebellion is in the air.
Jesus operates outside our jurisdiction.
Rome will descend on us all.
But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of thieves.
The world will never be the same. Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right, on a Christian university in Upland, Indiana. It's launching a new state-of-the-art initiative called Preach Labs to help equip current and future pastors behind the pulpit. Trey caught up with Pastor Tim McConnell, the director of the program, for today's main thing.
Preach Labs, it's actually an acronym. So tell us first what the acronym means, and then walk us through what was the motivation to launch something like this, because from what I understand, it's really a state-of-the-art initiative and approach to training pastors and training ministers in a way that has not been necessarily done before, at least not in this form.
Yeah, that's right. So what we're calling Preach at Taylor University stands for Preparing, Resourcing, Equipping, and Coaching Homiletic Excellence. So we want to be a place where people who want to grow in their ability to share the Word of God with the people of God can sharpen their skills, can learn sort of the impact of their behaviors, the impact of their preparations, their personal character. We want to create a space where future preachers can grow into this potential calling, this potential office of the preacher among the church. But how this got started was actually through Taylor University is in central Indiana, and there's something called the Lilly Foundation that does an awful lot of work for Christianity in Indiana and around the world. And they actually surveyed a number of churches and pastors years ago and asked what would really bless you, what would propel your ministry. And the churches and the pastors both said, if the preaching could be more compelling. So pastors were humble to say, I wish I could do this a little bit better. Congregations were willing to say, what would really help us is if the pastor could sharpen his or her skills to bring the word forward in a more compelling way. And so Lilly stepped forward with a compelling preaching initiative. They have actually about 36 of these different initiatives going on that they're supporting and resourcing. And Taylor said, you know what? We think God's calling us to be a part of that, and we want to do it in a unique way. And so Taylor jumped in with the Lilly Foundation, and we've received a 5-year startup grant to launch this Preach initiative at Taylor University.
So let's say somebody walks in, they're either a student at Taylor University or they're somebody who just wants to take advantage of these Preach Labs at Taylor. They walk in and they want to start utilizing these tools. What does that process look like for somebody walking in? Because I know that the setup there is unique.
It is. What we've done is we've created what Reverend Greg Dyson, our Vice President of Spiritual Affairs, has called kind of a flight simulator. So if you think about a pilot who's getting trained to crawl up into the cockpit of a plane, they get into a digital flight simulator. Well, we've created kind of a pulpit simulator, a kind of a climbing into the pulpit with cameras, confidence monitors, lights, sound systems, all the things that you would expect to need to have some acumen and some awareness of to step into the pulpit in our times. And we've put it into a lab space. See, a lot of what happens in preaching training right now is people are doing a lot of seminary training online, or they're preparing to be pastors online, or they just haven't had an opportunity to really train in the skills of ministry. And what happens often is we grow up in the church and we start preaching in the church, and everybody in the church says, "Hey, Trey, you're doing great. That was fantastic," and a big pat on the back, and you walk out with some confidence. But where's the opportunity to really get some constructive feedback, to really watch the tape back, and to see yourself embodied delivering a message, and to learn how the way you use your body, the way your voice is coming across, the way you're using your facial expressions, how all of that God is using to communicate the gospel, and you may or may not be aware of what you're doing. And so we've created a lab there. It's recording from all angles. There's actually a listening and viewing area outside of the lab where you can see what's happening and listen to what's happening. And so this is going to provide some really thick and constructive feedback for a preacher. So we want to give undergrads the opportunity to say, hey, let's pick up some basics here. Let's get going on the basic form of what it means to take on this responsibility. There are a lot of pastors who, as I said, wish they could kind of sharpen the axe. They're whacking away at this week after. Wasn't it Lincoln who said, if I had 4 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend 3 sharpening the axe? And there's a lot of pastors out there whacking away. God bless them, and they just feel like, man, that wasn't what I wanted. It didn't land the way I wanted. I wish I had time and a space to step back and go sharpen the axe a little bit and then get back at it. So we're going to be hosting pastors from all over. We're beginning with rural Indiana. And in fact, there's an event just in about 2 weeks where pastors from rural churches in Indiana are invited to come and hear from a master preacher. But we're going to be inviting pastors to come and kind of get an opportunity to sharpen that axe and to sharpen their skills and then go back at it.
Talk about some of the need for resources like this, because I can imagine there's some people who would say, yeah, well, when the church was built as it's described in the book of Acts, we didn't have all of these resources. We didn't have all of this technology. Church didn't look the way that it looks today, with congregations full of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and needing to hone these skills as orators. There are also stories throughout Scripture of people saying, I'm not really equipped to do this. Lord, I need you to come in and to help me. So talk about the need for tools like this, or maybe the blessing of resources available to us, and why as Christians we ought to take advantage of those when they are available to us.
Yeah, you know what, Trey? I mean, the church has always had tools or instruments, and pastors have always, needed to train themselves as orators, as persuasive speakers, and to know how their body was interacting with the world around them. I often talk with my tech team here at church. I say, where is this in the Bible? That we've got these microphones, these cameras, and we've got all this stuff. And what's an interesting moment is when Jesus said to the disciples, I'm getting in the boat, row me out so I can speak to the crowds. And they rowed him out on the boat over the lake. And what that did was that actually was a propelling of his voice. That was like an early microphone system that allowed him to speak to thousands. And that was technology. And then you look at Peter and Paul, and particularly Paul going to places like Ephesus, and you go and you see these great theaters and how they were set up to speak to many people at once. Well, you can't just step up there and speak in the same way that you would in a living room, or like most early churches were built in ancient house church situations, where you're in a very small room with 20 or 30, 40 people. Well, if you're going to speak to thousands, you need to learn how to do that in a different way. And you don't want to be a distraction. You don't want to be a block for the gospel. Because of our motivation to share the gospel widely, we've always been engaged in the advance of technology. What can we use? Can we jump on the radio? Can we jump on TV like CBN? Can we jump on, what platform can we jump on? And if a pastor's called to use those platforms, we want them to be equipped to use them well.
All right. Thanks for that conversation there. Interesting stuff, and because, you can actually land on a couple places when you're thinking about, if a church they put too much effort in and they have too much technology and they're all this, you can kind of criticize that. But because, God can use the simplest of speeches and the simplest of sermons, and that's true. But Another verse I was thinking of as we were going through that, Trey, was Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And so if you take that work heartily thing, like you should be, and I think that can be open to a little bit of interpretation of exactly how you apply that. But I think it would be absolutely well within our right to say, and our biblical command to say, you know what, how can I do this better? If I'm doing this heartily and for the Lord, what's the best I can be at this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I went to Liberty University, so other LU grads will be familiar with this because it was like pounded into our heads. But Jerry Falwell Sr. used to always say, if it's Christian, it ought to be better. And it's kind of like his paraphrase of that Bible verse. And I think, there's some truth to that. So there's probably some good takeaways from that conversation and along that vein.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So good stuff there. Appreciate it. All right. That's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
Romans 12:12, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Just a great reminder, no matter what's going on, we got to keep on trucking.
Yeah, I mean, what a countercultural message and kind of counter to our own human intuition, right? All of those things are kind of hallmarks of the Christian life.
Yeah, and I think for me, the convicting ones being faithful in prayer. I mean, that's one I think you'll always notice that, especially if you're married and you're praying with your spouse, you'll notice the difference in the times when you kind of let the prayer slip versus when you don't. And, it's so much more of a blessing when you're praying faithfully each and every day. All right. That's where we're going to leave it today. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, a creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend. God bless.